Simon. So we're really
You say so.
He's actually now the Deputy Director of Research at the Cure Parkinson's Trust. And before that, he was in academic research for 15 years. And he's going to talk to us about what's happening in research now and how it's going to go forward. And I won't say any more because Simon's the expert and I'm not. So over to you, Simon.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now and hopefully not share the inappropriate stuff. I'll go with that one there. That looks good.
That's it. Yeah.
You can all see this?
Lovely. Thank you.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak today. I'm going to be talking about monsters, mucus, and more. This is, I'm primarily focusing on clinical research that's going on in 2020, 2021, just to try and give you a bit of an overview of what's going on. There's a lot going on, and so this is going to feel a little bit overwhelming. I've got quite a few slides, but hopefully you will leave with the impression that there's a lot of activity currently going on in Parkinson's research. So I work for the Cure Parkinson's Trust, but I have been associated with Parkinson's UK for a very long time. Oops, I can't get the slides to move. Last time we didn't have a projector, so I couldn't give you slides, and now I can't get the slides to move. Let me try that. No, oh dear, this is not a good start. Let me just stop this for a second and I'll go back to this and try that there, and I'll do this over here. And I'll click on that one there. And I'll click on that thing there. There we go, now we're moving. So yes, I've been associated with Parkinson's UK in multiple ways. Firstly, they funded some of the research I did up in Cambridge University with Professor Roger Barker. And I've also been the chairman of my local Parkinson's UK support branch up here in North Hertfordshire and St Evernage. It used to be called Stevenage, but which sounds nicer. We're rebranding, if you like. But the first lesson tonight from the talk is never buy a bottle of wine from St Evernage. The Cure Parkinson's Trust, which you might not have heard of, is a UK registered charity, but we fund internationally research that's focused on disease modification in Parkinson's. I'll come back to what we mean by disease modification in a moment. But the trust was set up in 2005 by 4 individuals with Parkinson's, and I should say, they're extremely supportive wives. These 4 gentlemen in this picture here were the founders, and they were frustrated with the lack of research that was focused on cure. They didn't want care, they wanted to cure this condition. And so they set up the charity, and the main individual of the 4 that deserves note is this chap here. This is Tom Isaacs. So Tom was diagnosed at 27 with young onset Parkinson's. So he's 27 years old, and he was a surveyor working out of London when he was diagnosed with the condition. And he did what any normal person, of course, would do in this situation. And he decided to walk the entire coastline of the UK, all 4,500 miles of it, in order to raise funds and also raise awareness of Parkinson's. And when he got back, he set up the Cure Parkinson's Trust, which is focused on slowing, stopping, or reversing Parkinson's. We don't do anything else other than focus on research that will slow, stop, or reverse Parkinson's. And the Trust is now a major funder of research in this area. And we do most of our clinical research through what's called the Link Clinical Trials Initiative, which is a program where every year we invite a group of 21 of the world's leading experts in Parkinson's to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we present them with a selection of molecules that we think are of interest with regards to disease modification for Parkinson's. And they prioritize 4 or 5 of them that should be taken through to clinical trial in the next 18 months. And the Cure Parkinson's Trust is then mandated to get those drugs into trial. Now, a lot of these drugs have been repurposed. So repurposing allows us to speed up the clinical trial program because we don't have to do safety and toxicity studies. And we can get these drugs to market much faster. So they sit around a table and they debate over the period of 2 days. Our meeting this year is going to be virtual, and it's actually next week. And they'll be debating another 20 compounds that will be hopefully going into clinical trial in the next 18 months, COVID allowing. So what do we mean by Parkinson's? Most of you will be very familiar, of course, with what the condition is, but the underlying biology is still a bit of a mystery. It is characterized, of course, by a triad of motor features, that is slowness of movement, rigidity of movement, and in many cases, a resting tremor, and also a variable host of non-motor features, such as loss of smell, sleep disturbance, and also gastrointestinal issues can be quite common. But the motor features appear when you have the loss of dopamine neurons in the brain. And you can actually see this at the post-mortem level. On the right-hand side of the picture here, you have 2 sections of brain. On the right-hand side, you have a person that died without Parkinson's. And you can see sort of dark shading in 2 areas on either side of the brain. And if you look at the Parkinson's brain on the other side, you can see less of this dark shading. So the dark shading are the dopamine neurons. You can actually visualize them with your eye. In this manner, and you can see if you compare the 2, there's a lot less of the dark shading in the Parkinson brain than there is in the control brain there. We also, and these dopamine neurons project branches. So the dopamine neurons sort of sit down in the bottom of the brain, but they project branches up into parts of the brain high above it, and we can actually visualize those branches. Here you can see them sort of making their way up to these 2 areas called the putamen and the caudate. And in Parkinson's, you get a lot less and less of these branches making their way up there. And we can visualize this in the hospital using a DAT scan. Many of you will have been through this process before, where you lie on your back and they inject you with a tracer, a drug, and they can take an image of the dopamine activity in your brain. And on the left-hand side here, you see dopamine activity in a normal, unaffected brain. And on the right-hand side, this is a bird's eye view looking down on the brain. On the right-hand side, you can see the dopamine activity of someone with Parkinson's. So an obvious question is, why are dopamine cells being lost? And the honest answer is we really don't know. We're still investigating the basic biology of the condition. But it does seem to have something to do with a protein called alpha-synuclein. It sounds like a distant galaxy far off in some other solar system, but it's one of the most common proteins in our brain. It makes up about 1% of everything that it makes up a neuron. And in Parkinson's, it makes these funny little balls, these compact little clusters that we call Lewy bodies. And you can see a blue arrow on the right-hand side here pointing at one. This buildup of alpha-synuclein is believed to be part of the problem in Parkinson's. It seems to be having some sort of toxic effect, is the theory. Now, shifting to clinical trials, what I'd like to do is bring your attention to a recent study that was published, and it's predominantly the work of these 3 Parkinson's research advocates: Sue Buff, whose husband has got Parkinson's; Gary Rafaloff, he has Parkinson's; and Kevin McFarthing. Gary and Sue are both in America, but Kevin lives out in Oxford. And all 3 of them, they maintain databases of all the clinical trials that are currently going on for Parkinson's. And they've put together this enormous research paper where they've analyzed all of the current clinical trials for Parkinson's. And I'll put these slides can be made available if people want to have a look. And I'll make sure that this link is available to you if you're interested in this paper. But they found that during 2019, the 12 months that make up 2019, there were 145 clinical trials focused just on new medications for Parkinson's. So this isn't studies looking at diet or exercise or anything like this. This was just purely drug development. And of these trials, 57, so about almost 40%, were focused on disease modification. And if you look, all of the trials are currently that were going on are currently pictured in this circular diagram through the various phases of clinical development. Phase 1 is sort of a safety test. You want to make sure that the drug doesn't kill anybody. Number 2 is you want to make sure the drug doesn't kill anybody over a long period of time. And you're looking for signs of evidence. And at phase 3, it's a very long study, and you're really sort of focusing on evidence of efficacy. Is the drug doing what you want it to do? And that's what the regulators are going to base their judgment on, whether they should approve it for clinical use or not. So there's these 3 phases, and all of these drugs are currently going through these 3 phases in clinical trials around the world. Now this begs the question, what do we mean by disease modification? We've got 57 odd trials focused on disease modification. What do we mean by modifying the disease? So the general course of Parkinson's, the normal trajectory is what you see in front of you, this line, this diagonal line sort of going downwards. You sort of have the first evidence that something's not quite right. And then a few months later or a few years later, you will have a diagnosis. And then we initiate symptomatic treatment. Symptomatic treatment are treatments that just take care of the symptoms. They don't take care of the underlying condition. And so you'll see a positive response to a symptomatic treatment, such as L-DOPA, which shifts the line sort of up, but it still maintains this trajectory, this downward trajectory. So a disease-modifying therapy is any medication of any treatment of a disease that can change that trajectory of the condition. A therapy that will slow, stop, or reverse the disease. And so what we really want in the perfect scenario is shortly after there's any sort of evidence that something's not quite right and you have the diagnosis, we can initiate a disease-modifying treatment which will adjust, which will move that trajectory up, 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 and hopefully send people back towards where they were. Age, of course, allowing. I'm feeling a bit old and tired myself today, so you'll have to forgive any sort of negative tone. Now, with regards to disease-modifying therapies, and this is where I come to monsters in the title of my talk, one of the big areas that we'll be focusing on over the next couple of years are a class of drugs called GLP-1 agonists. And the monster in this situation is this guy here, a very cute little creature called the Gila monster that you find in North America. If it bites you and you're diabetic, it will probably have a good effect before it kills you, because the venom of the Gila monster has a protein called GLP. And what the researchers have done is they've taken this, they've synthesized it, they've made an artificial version of it, and we use this for people with diabetes. So we've taken all the poison out, and we've kept this particular protein, and this is what is considered a frontline treatment now for diabetes. But a few years ago, there was some research looking in models of Parkinson's with these drugs, GLP-1 agonists. And the main drug is called exenatide. And the data that was coming from the models of Parkinson's was quite exciting. And clinical trials were set up. And in 2017, the results of a phase 2 study, so this is where you're looking for long-term safety and some sort of signs of evidence of efficacy, the results of that study were published. So the participants in the study were treated for 48 weeks, and they, what the researchers found was that the folks who were on placebo, that is like a sugar tablet, it's an inert treatment, they kept on progressing. This is the red line you can see on the graph over time. So this is a 60-week study, but they were treated for 48 weeks. And as you can see, they keep progressing, gradually getting worse. But the people who took exenatide, so this is the blue line, immediately had a positive response, and their symptoms plateaued for the rest of the study. And at 48 weeks, the researchers stopped the treatment, And they wanted to see how long this positive effect would last. And as you can see, between 48 weeks and 60 weeks, there is this kind of trend back up towards the starting point there, this dotted line across the middle. So this was a very positive, this was a very exciting result. This was just with regards to the motor symptoms. Other aspects of Parkinson's didn't show any effect, but this response was hugely exciting for the research community, because this was the first sort of signal that we could potentially modify the course of Parkinson's. And the study was conducted by this chap here, Professor Tom Fultonay from UCL in London. He's standing here with Tom Isaacs of the Cure Parkinson's Trust. And it's all led to Tom starting up a large phase 3 study, which is now underway. This is going to be 200 participants, and they will be assessed for 2 years. And it's been funded by the UK government. And it's been conducted across 6 research sites in the UK. And the Cure Parkinson's Trust, we've been pushing exenatide all the way through here, from the preclinical data all the way through to this phase 3 study. And it's been an extremely stimulating and exciting journey. But as part of the phase 3 study, what we're doing is funding 2 added value sub-studies along with the Van Andel Institute, our partners. So added value sub-studies, for any clinical trial that we conduct, we must have added value. That way, if the treatment itself fails or doesn't have an effect, we can at least take other pieces of data away that can be used more broadly in other clinical trials. So added value studies are an absolute foundation to what we do. And in the exenatide phase 3 study, we have a digital technology sub-study. This is a device on your cell phone that we're seeing if it'll track the symptoms over time. And also we also are funding a brain imaging component to the exenatide study as well. And that study, the phase 3 study, is recruiting at the moment. I think they've got about 20 participants of the 200 thus far. And we will hopefully see the results in 2024, because it's a long study. It's 2 years of treatment. It's going to take a while before we see the results, unfortunately. But there are other GLP-1 agonists, so this class of diabetes drug, that are being tested currently in other clinical trials, being supported by the Cure Parkinson's Trust. One of those is a phase 2 trial in Los Angeles that is with a drug that's very similar to exenatide called liraglutide, and that's a 54-week study. It's fully recruited, and the results are expected in 2021. And then we also have another GLP-1 agonist study in France, and that's 158 people in a phase 2 study being treated for 12 months. And again, the results of that are also excuse me, expected in 2021. Now I'm shifting from monsters to mucus, because that's where I bring in this drug called Ambroxol. Ambroxol is a very commonly used respiratory medication. It clears up mucus and inflammation in sort of the lungs and the throat area. But many years ago now, researchers found that Ambroxol was having a positive effect in models of Parkinson's. In particular, it was boosting levels of a protein called GCase, or glucocerebrosidase, if you want a real tongue twister. Now, this protein is involved with the waste disposal system of cells. And by boosting waste disposal activity, we're clearing out the rubbish in brain cells and allowing the brain cells to function better, taking the stress off them and allowing them to function in a more healthy fashion. And the hope is that by boosting the waste disposal system of the cells, we will be able to slow down the progression of the condition. If this buildup of alpha-synuclein protein that I was talking about is playing an important role in the condition, then by boosting the waste disposal, maybe we can grab all that alpha-synuclein and dispose of it and allow the cells to function more efficiently. And so a phase 2 study was conducted by this handsome chap, Professor Anthony Shapiro. He's also at UCL in London. And it was called the AIM-PD study. It involved 18 participants who were treated for 12 months with, whoops, this is incorrect. They were all treated with ambroxol. Sorry, there's a bit of a typo there. And the drug was well tolerated. And the results indicated that the drug was also raising levels of GCase protein in the brain. You can see in this graph here at baseline, all of the participants are little black and white dots. And the level of GCase protein in the brain is determined by where the dot is on the graph. And on the right-hand side of the graph here, you can see that all the dots have sort of shifted upwards, some of them quite high. And this indicates that levels of GCase protein in the brain have increased. And this is, the participants in the study really deserve a lot of credit. They're very brave to take part in the study, firstly, but also to hang in there, because this was a 6-month study and it required them to take 21 pills a day of ambroxol on top of the Parkinson's medication that they were already taking. And not only was it a lot of pills, but the pills taste awful. So we're going through a process at the moment of trying to improve the formulation of the drug and also planning the next stage of the development. This will probably be shifting to a phase 2/3 kind of large long-term study so that we can determine whether this is having a positive effect on actually slowing the progression of Parkinson's. And if you'd like to be potentially be part of that research, there is a study at the moment called the PD Frontline study, and they're collecting collecting the details and genetic background of people who are interested in taking part in these sort of clinical trials. So again, I'll make sure that the slides are available for you if you want to have a look at some of these links that I'm mentioning. But we're trying to, with PD Frontline, start getting trial-ready cohorts of people prepared to partake in these studies. Now, another type of approach that's being used for experimentally used for treating Parkinson's is called immunotherapy. This involves boosting the immune system of the body. What we can do is, in your immune system, you have these tiny Y-shaped, these sort of 3-sided structures. These are called antibodies. And they target, they can be designed to target specific proteins. For example, alpha-synuclein. So if we want to remove alpha-synuclein from the brain, we can design an antibody that targets alpha-synuclein, takes it out, and the immune system gets rid of it. And so this has been in trial for quite a while now, but in April, we got the results of the clinical trial, a very large clinical trial that's been conducted by the biotech companies Roche and Prothena. And it was a phase 2 trial involving 300 people treated for 52 weeks with an antibody called PRX002. In April, the companies announced that the study had not met its primary endpoint. That means it hadn't achieved its, an endpoint is a pre-decided measure of efficacy, whether the study is successful or not. And the researchers who conducted the study said that they hadn't met that endpoint, that particular measure, but the data had displayed signs of efficacy. And this last week, you might have seen press releases about this study where they were presenting the data. The data is very interesting, but the full results of the study will hopefully be available in 2021. What we've had at the moment is just press releases. So it would be interesting to see the final data and whether they take this forward to a phase 3 study. And this is not the only immunotherapy study. There's also a company called Biogen They also have a large phase 2 study, again, 300 plus people, but it's not ending until 2022. And immunotherapy is quite a active field for Parkinson's research. There's also a company who are trying to boost your immune system with a vaccine. So this is an Austrian company called Apheris, and they have conducted a phase 1 study that has gone on for 4 years. So they are pretty confident that their vaccine is safe in individuals with Parkinson's, and they are looking to start phase 2 studies later this year, again, COVID allowing. Another approach to slowing Parkinson's is to support mitochondria. Mitochondria are a crucial component of the cells in your body. These are the little power stations that provide cells with the energy that they require to do all their function. Excuse me. And there is a readily available drug that's used in the clinic called UDCA. It's a bile acid that helps to break down gallstones. So if you've ever had gallstones, you've probably been treated with this drug called UDCA. But a few years ago, groups of researchers, including some researchers in Sheffield here in the UK, noticed that UDCA was having beneficial effects on mitochondria in models of Parkinson's, not just not standard sporadic Parkinson's, but also the genetic forms of Parkinson's. And so they set up a study, which is supported by the Cure Parkinson's Trust again, called the UDCA in Parkinson's, or UP study. It's a phase 2 clinical trial. It's been conducted over the last 12 months. It's a 48-week treatment of UDCA in 30 individuals. And it's been conducted by Professor Oliver Bandman here. The original research in the lab and models of Parkinson's was conducted by Dr. Heather Mortisboy. But hopefully the UP study results will be available in late, that should be 2021. That's a terrible, that's naughty. All these typos, I'm sorry. Before I make these slides available, I'll go through and edit them. So that's another thing to look out for in 2021. Moving on, another trial to look out for in 2021 is this a clinical trial looking at iron chelators. So iron chelator is a class of drugs that's used to reduce the level of iron in people with blood conditions. And iron builds up in the brains of people with Parkinson's, in these dopamine neurons in particular. And so there's been a trial in Europe, in France, Canada, Germany, and the UK. I'm not sure why I'm saying Canada is part of Europe. North American and a European study here, where they've been treating 140 people with this drug that pulls iron out, an iron chelator called deferriprone. And we should be getting the results of that study next year as well. There's a lot of clinical trial results coming out in 2021, including potentially this one. This is a Parkinson's UK supported clinical trial that's looking at the gut microbiome, the bacteria in our guts. And it's involving this treatment called Simprove, which is a probiotic. So it's providing food for the bacteria, good food for the bacteria in our guts. And they've had 35 people on this treatment and 35 people on placebo treatment for 3 months. And the study is finishing this year. And we should hopefully see the results later this year or early next year, hopefully. So that you can see there's a lot of clinical trial activity going on. One big project that's kicking off very shortly is, well, that has kicked off, is the Australian Parkinson's Mission. So a couple of years ago, the Australian government committed 30 million Australian dollars to a clinical trial program for Parkinson's. But the difference here is that they want to see multi-arm clinical trials. So this will be 4 different treatments, all within one particular study, compared to a placebo. So instead of comparing one treatment to a placebo in a single study, this will be 4 treatments compared to one placebo. There'll be 60 people on each of those treatments and 60 people on the placebo group. So it's 300 people. And they will be treated for 60 weeks. And then at the end of that 60 weeks, we'll have a look at the results. This trial has just started recruiting in Australia. So we should hopefully start seeing the results in 2022 or 23. But planning for a second, because they've got $30 million to spend, the planning for a second study of this sort of nature is also underway. This allows us to screen, if you like, or compare multiple drugs all at the same time and get a lot of treatments going through the clinical trial process. So at the end of this particular study, hopefully therapeutic number 3 gives us a signal of efficacy or signs of having an effect. And we can take that one forward into a phase 3 trial while we ignore or we do more research on therapeutics 1 and 2 and 4. It's a way of speeding up the process of finding drugs that hopefully work. Back here in the UK, there's a trial that's going to be starting very shortly for neurotriptyline. This is an antidepressant drug, and this is called the ADEPT PD study. So this is another study to be watching out for. And there's also a immune suppressive medication or an anti-inflammatory drug called azathioprine. And this study is going to be conducted up in Cambridge. It has not started yet, but hopefully before the end of the year, they will be recruiting. And that will involve 12 months of treatment in 60 participants. Now, a lot of this is all drug related and people aren't always comfortable about taking more drugs. So one very interesting bit of research that's come out recently is exercise. And this is something that everybody can do, even though it takes a bit of work for me to get out of the chair and go for a bike ride. But a study in, was it last year? I think it was last year was published, and this is called the Parkinson Shape study. They took 2 groups of individuals, and one was a cycling intervention group. So the treatment was hopping on an exercycle at home versus an active control group. These people were doing stretches and relaxation techniques. And what the researchers found was that the exercising for 30 to 45 minutes, 3 times a week for 6 months, actually slowed down the progression of Parkinson's. And the level of exercise here was sort of going to a pace where you were just able to maintain a conversation with somebody. So you're not exhausting yourself every single time. You're just taking yourself up to a level of exercise where you can sort of keep talking to somebody standing beside you. That sort of level of exercise. So it's not overly strenuous, but not only is the exercise having a positive effect for your well-being and your health, but also there were signs that it was slowing down the progression of Parkinson's. And this research here has stimulated a very large number of follow-up studies that are now looking for further evidence of efficacy, but also it offers people in the community an immediate way of actually doing something about the condition themselves. It provides them with evidence to show that this can actually have an effect. So the big question that everyone always asks me at these sorts of presentations is what's going to work? And my answer is twofold. And I'll warn you now, one of those is going to disappoint you. The first answer is it depends on what type of Parkinson's each person has. We already know from the exenatide study that not everybody who takes exenatide responds to it. Those who do have a very good response, and those who don't have no response. So when we talk about Parkinson's disease, we're looking at potentially multiple diseases, multiple conditions that are all under the same sort of umbrella term of Parkinson's. So it depends on what type of Parkinson's we have. And the second answer I have is that I don't expect anything that I've presented today to actually work. And I need to explain myself there because we have expectations. And we should never go into a clinical trial with expectations. Because if we go into a clinical trial with expectations, that means we're biased. And being biased can actually impact the result. But we have expectations that life is going to be a perfect arrow on the left-hand side here, when really in reality, it takes this kind of squiggly path. Well, we do get to where we want to be, but it never quite lives up to expectations. So it's what I'm trying to say is that we need to be very careful with how we manage our expectations. We can't be going into clinical trials expecting positive results. They must be an unbiased test of whether a treatment's going to work or not. So keep calm and lower your expectations is kind of one of my main take-home messages tonight. And this comes also from people within the community. Martin Taylor here, he was diagnosed with young onset Parkinson's at age 32. And he likes to project what he calls positive realism. And that is that nothing's worked thus far, but we have to be positive. So we have to be realistic and positive and be very careful with our expectations. And for those interested, he set up a few years ago the Parkinson's Research Interest Group on Facebook, which I've got a picture of just up in the corner here, where you can go along and learn about and discuss a lot of the ongoing research. I think there's about 4,000 members now. But having said that we have to be careful with our expectations, is there a reason for optimism? And the answer there is definitely. Oops, wrong way. And that's based solely on this graph here. Never in the history of Parkinson's have we had so much research. This graph is from 1817 when James first described the condition that bears his name. And as you can see, each of these black lines on the right-hand side are research publications in the thousands. So this is going up to 2017. Now that we're in 2020, I can tell you that the number should be in, will be over 8,000 very shortly for 2020. We might even hit 9,000. So it's been a very busy year for Parkinson's research and only going upwards. In effect, in the last 200 years of Parkinson's, over 80% of the research has actually been done in the last 20 years. I find that quite remarkable. And a lot of that is based on the huge amount of funding that's going into Parkinson's. Just this particular week, we heard of a large funding round from a group called Aligning Science Across Parkinson's. And this is Sergey Brin. He is one of the co-founders of a small company called Google. And he and his family have been affected by Parkinson's. And they are sinking huge amounts of money into Parkinson's research. So in just one round of Parkinson's research funding this year, they have sunk $161 million. And that's being awarded over a 3-year period. So the 3 years of research will be 161 million, going to just under 100 investigators and 21 teams, and looking at the basic research of basic science of Parkinson's, looking at the biology underlying the condition, hopefully giving us new targets for therapeutics. And that's just for this year. Next month, they open up another round of another 100 and however much. So there's vast amounts of money being poured into Parkinson's research at the moment. So not only do we have huge numbers of research papers being published, but we have huge amounts of funding going into it as well. How can you get involved with all of this research? You can do it in many different ways. Not everyone wants to be a participant in a clinical trial, but perhaps you can be involved in the form of communicating the science or helping out with in a research lab. Excuse me. Reading the lay report of a research grant application. There are multiple different ways that people in the community get involved. It's a very exciting time for Parkinson's research. And what I'd like to do is finish my talk with a quote that I always use from a hero of mine. His name is Mike Lloyd, and he's a fellow Kiwi. And he has this quote, which is, to me, it's a celebration of what I can do. Mike was diagnosed with Parkinson's 8 years ago, but he's just, last year, he finished his 11th New York Marathon. Quite remarkable for someone who's had Parkinson's for 8 years, but it's more remarkable is that Mike is also blind. He's been blind since childhood. And so, as he says, it's a celebration of what he can do. And he's a fantastic guy. He's not focused. He doesn't focus on what he can't do. He only focuses on what he can. He doesn't worry about what he can't control. He only focuses on what he can control. And people ask him, what are you going to do when you can't run? And he just simply says, I'll find something else to do. But it's that kind of attitude that I've got a lot of respect for. And that's all I've got to say. I could go on, but I'll stop here because people are giving up and falling asleep and changing the channel, wondering what is on. But if anybody wants to get hold of me, you can get hold of me at Simon at cureparkinsons.org.uk, and I'll be very happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Simon. Who wants